Good evening. Thank you for coming along on this semi-miserable night. The weather in Geelong is actually better than it was on the road here, so thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Lindy Cameron, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation, I'm delighted to welcome you all to tonight's event with author Stephen Johnson, discussing his latest novel, Box, with a bit of a throwback to his first novel and writing in general. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar original owners of the land on which our library services operate. We pay respect to Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar elders, past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. I'm very pleased to have been invited to facilitate the evening's event with Steve. I'll call him Steve because I've known him as Steve my entire life. No, not my entire life. The length of time that we've known each other, which is last century. We'll go into that later. Stephen's a writer, TV producer, kayaker, and a traveller who now plots crime fiction from his garret overlooking the Tamaki River in Auckland. His debut novel, Tugga's Mob, was inspired by 3 seasons working as a tour guide on double-decker buses around Europe in the 1980s. You can imagine what came out of that. His latest novel, Box, is a riveting crime novel set in the world of Australian greyhound racing, where the fates of 3 women are strangely aligned by a killer obsessed with retribution. And the novel is set in Melbourne and in Steiglitz, which is just north of Geelong, which you probably know. So please join me in welcoming Stephen Johnson.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back home again after so many years. I'll try again. Thank you very much. Wonderful to be back home.
Steve and I do actually know each other and have known each other for a while, so I actually sort of threw myself to be the facilitator of this rather than was invited. I'm also his publisher, but Steve and I were cadet journalists in the before times of last century on the Geelong News when it still existed. We were both cadets. We both got a really good grounding in journalism, and then I went off to work on newspapers and Steve went off to work in TV journalism because at the time he didn't like writing stories, did you, Steve?
I've always been a lazy writer, you might say. In fact, I didn't want to be a journalist. I didn't want to do anything, really. I was actually on the dole when I got the job at the News, which has always caused Lindy a lot of pain because she was a cadet. I'd got a Bachelor of Arts from what was then the Gordon Institute, and didn't really know what to do after that. My brother, who was sponsoring me, as in providing beer money, got sick of doing that, and he got me a job on the News writing cricket notes. And so I had a bit of extra help from the government, which sort of came through what they call the dole, and the cricket notes, and that was enough to keep me in beer money and going to the beach over the summer. And then the News said, oh, look, there's a job come up, cadetship, take it. I said, no, it's too much hard work, you know, you've got to go work 5 days a week. And they sort of pressured me.
Blackmailed him.
Lindy was sitting in the other office, as they're telling me, we're going to call the dole office, we're going to get your dole stopped. No, you won't, no, you won't, no. And the editor picked up. Hello. The editor picked up the phone, started dialing. I said, no, he's bluffing. But in the end, cut a long story short, I accepted, and it was a painful start. I had to lay out and sub 4 pages of tabloid, which I'd never done before in my life.
And the miffy part for me was that I was in my 3rd year as a cadet, and second year as a cadet. I knew more than he did, but because he had a degree, he came in and got paid more than me, and I taught him everything he knows.
And nothing has changed. He still knows more.
So fast forward several decades, and Steve gives me a call, email call one day to say, I've written a novel, and I hear you're a publisher, and would you take a look at it? And you know that you do for your friends. You really shouldn't, because quite often it turns out to be a disaster. But in the case of Steve's book, Tugga's Mob, it was an absolute delight and a good rollicking, mysterious. 3 continents, because it's got a flashback to Europe. So tell us, Steve, how did you go from being a TV journalist who doesn't like writing to a crime novelist who now can't stop?
didn't want to work anymore, actually. It was back in 2017, and our children had left home. 3 daughters were scattered around the world doing what we used to do and what we said we would go back to do when I retired. So I convinced my wife, Kath, I said, look, let's just go now. You know, we're ships in the night with our work and careers. Why don't we sell the house so the girls can't come back and take all our money and go to Europe and do what we wanted to do. So we did that, sold the house, bought a 7-metre motorhome sight unseen and took off for London. As we did that, I just had this little idea about a story. I thought, it sounds interesting, and niggle. And because I had that freedom to think about it and just relax a bit more, I just kept going. I thought, well, I'll try writing it down. And I just wrote a little bit more. And as we were journeying around Europe, seeing the sights of Europe again, and it just took place. It took its own pace and provided more inspiration. So, I was surprised at how much fun it was, how it came together, and at the end of it, I thought, what do I do with it? Kath's had to take notes as I'm driving along. I'd hand the book to her and say, look, write this down. I've just got an inspiration. And go into a campsite that night and over a beer on the table, sitting there just tapping away on the computer and putting it in and thinking, I think this is reasonable, but is anyone going to read it? And so eventually I said, well, Lindy, what do I do with it?
Lindy, what do I do with it?
Get it edited.
Yes, get it edited. So we sent it to an editor, who then kept sending him drafts back as he's still wandering around Europe and stomping around paddocks, going, she doesn't know what I really mean by this page, this chapter, this whatever.
I've never met the editor. I've never met the first 2 editors of my books, which is probably good because one of us would have ended up dead at some stage. Hello, Brendan. This is my brother. And every time the editors came back, so I've been a journalist for 40 years, and as I say, I wasn't a wonderful, strict writer, I thought. Working in television, the pictures told the story. And the editor said, this is good, this is interesting, but, just needs a bit of work. So when the edits came back with line after line of red type and cross-outs and syntax and grammar corrections, you think, oh, goodness me, what have I got myself into? And in fact, the first ones came back. We're in the motorhome in Scotland, waiting to catch a ferry the next morning to Northern Ireland. And a foo-foo valve sort of exploded, and Kath said, go for a walk, just buzz off, calm down. Came back and thought, okay, yep, I'll show her. So attacked the computer, and I'm a 2-fingered typist from the old Remington typewriter day. And so for the next couple of months, Kath was telling me when I was editing, for goodness sakes, get out of the van, because you're just making the whole thing rock. But anyway, that night, I'm ploughing into it, and then the battery went dead. We were free camping. I had no power source. So the next morning, we're first in line for the ferry, booked in, took the laptop and the power cord upstairs, started pounding away, kept going, think, oh shoot, I'll show this editor, right. And then I got a tap on the shoulder, and Kath said, are you coming to Ireland? You've been at it for 2 hours.
So my first question, in terms of your actual books, why crime? And was it actually crime to begin with? So if you just give a little background about the core team who formed the basis of both novels. So there's not one single protagonist, which is a really interesting technique that Steve's used. So not one single protagonist. So obviously you wanted to enlighten the world of what it's really like to make TV shows, but why crime?
The idea that struck me while I'm waiting to go to Europe and then going to Europe was based upon our travel days. When we were tour guides, you're sitting in Rome campsite and you should be out there having fun, and it's bucketing down with rain, so how do you entertain 20 people? So we used to play a game called Killer, where you would pull a card from a deck, and that person, if they pulled the joker out, they were going to be the killer. They had to sort of catch everyone off guard and wink at them without people noticing. So a bit of fun for the night. and kept them entertained for a couple of hours. People would be dying. Testing. People would be dying all over the bus, on the stairs, outside, and doing it in dramatic ways because everyone got right into it. And other times people would be dying under the Eiffel Tower. They'd be frothing at the mouth, putting toothpaste and, acting it out, which is good fun. But I had this idea, what if someone took it a little too seriously? That you're the killer, and they said, oh, okay, and they start bumping off passengers. But then I realised, well, no, it wouldn't. After one or two deaths, the company would cancel the tour and it's all over. So the idea of crime came through that, just the idea of the game we used to play on the bus. But I thought, well, what if something happened during the bus days? So I'm trying to plan a novel, knowing nothing about writing, having done lots of reading. You're told, write about what you know. So I knew travel in Europe, I knew tour guiding, I knew a lot of places in Europe, and I thought that would be an interesting concept. And so the story with Tugga's Mob is Judy Williams is a backpacker from Waikato in New Zealand who goes off on tour like so many did. Hopefully many of you did the same things. And she joins a bus tour. It wasn't top deck travel. Otherwise, a lot of my former friends and colleagues would never talk to me again because terrible things started happening to her. But because of the era, no one paid any attention or took any action. And things escalate to the point where she dies. Along the way, what we did in the 80s, everyone had a diary. You didn't have a mobile phone to record your adventures and photos and that. Everything was recorded in the diary. So that diary was forgotten. Judy's death is not considered suspicious at the time until 30 years later when her diary is rediscovered and the protagonists involved in her death are then subjected to a trail of revenge that they never saw coming. So starting from scratch, okay, I had a backpacker, easy. I had the bus. I didn't quite have the I didn't have the police procedural background, so I opted to use a television current affairs program as my amateur sleuths. Curly Rogers was on a weekend holiday with his wife going down to Lorne, and they see a crash on the Great Ocean Road, and he stops to investigate. There's a car going off, but he notices a policeman investigating the crash. Hello. Sorry. He noticed a policeman noticed something suspicious, and Curly follows him down and sees, no, this doesn't look like a normal crash off the Great Ocean Road. So from there, the story starts to unfold. So you've got the background of the newsroom, which I know newsrooms from Australia and New Zealand from 40 years. You do have a police element to it, but I was wanting something different from a lot of crime fiction stories. And being new, I thought, well, I didn't quite have a central character to stand out from the newsroom because certain people would probably never talk to me again because you modelled it on me. So I spread the load across the newsroom, and I just found that collection of characters allowed me to introduce a bit of light and shade into the story. So you have serious crime, the bodies are piling up, but you've got the newsroom banter and the insight into news gathering and news life, which I thought was a bit of a risk. At that time, Donald Trump was in the White House, and everything was fake news and the media was terrible. And so I took a gamble on it working. And so it did go down well in the first story, and I loved it so much, and thank goodness Lindy said, yes, this story has merit, I want to publish. The idea for the second book, Boxed, came along, and I thought, well, I've got my characters. So first time around, I had to create the characters from scratch. In the second book, I had the characters, I had the newsroom characters there. In the first book, there were two characters, Kim Prescott and Joe Trescothick. Kim's a researcher, wanting to be a reporter, ambitious, would do anything, eager for a story. Jo is a little office dynamo. She doesn't walk around the office. She pushes her office chair around. We call her the toe crusher. Anybody gets in the way, she keeps running over the senior producer's toes all the time. So a bit of light and shade, but she's a quirky character who loves a glass of wine and a good party. So in the second book, I thought, I'll work with them. And okay, what does an old man know about 20-something reporter and PA? Luckily, I was an old man who had 3 daughters who were in their 20s, roughly the same age as these protagonists. And so I wouldn't say I stalked my daughters, but I did listen and try to pay attention to how they dressed, what they said, what they did, their personalities, their values and that. They like to have fun, but I believe they're good citizens of the world. And I think I projected that with Kim and Jo.
It's quite interesting that you don't want to, that you spread the love of having multiple characters, like an ensemble in a sense, because you didn't want any of your other colleagues to, think you were picking on them, and yet you quite happily picked on your children to use them as models for the main character, which is good because. One thing I'd like to say about all of your main characters, that they're all, they're quite different and they're quite believable. And speaking from someone who knows a thing or two about crime fiction, I happen to be the Vice President of Sisters in Crime Australia, and I'm also a crime writer myself. Having having a team as your sleuthing team is actually quite unusual. So if you've not read Steve's book yet, if you have an idea of, say, a show like Vera, or even the other one, Shetland, you've got everyone in the office. So what Steve has done is given almost equal to everyone in the news office, whereas Vera's the star of one, and what's his name?
Jimmy Perez in Shetland.
Jimmy Perez, it's such a weird name. And Jimmy Perez is the star of the other, so a lot of stuff focuses on them, whereas in Steve's 2 books, the first book has got 2 characters who are doing most of the work, and in the second book, 2 other characters come out of the shadows, which is Kim and Jo, to lead the investigation in the second book. And it works really well because the other characters are always there. It's like stepping into a newsroom and thinking, I know these people, who's gonna break the story this time and how's it gonna work? Although she does have an unusual habit of stumbling over bodies.
Bodies, yes.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing from the first book, that finding a body without spoiling it for anybody who hasn't read it yet. And then I thought, well, Agatha Christie, Miss Marple, she could go to a country house in England and find a body every other weekend. So why can't a reporter do that? Just has the knack, which the producer loves. In fact, she keeps finding these bodies on the weekend. So the weekend producers on the news are ecstatic because they've got the lead story the next day, come into work. Great, Kim's got another body. Terrific.
You were talking about, just earlier on when we first got here, you were talking about going to, which beach was it today?
Avalon Beach.
Avalon, yeah.
First time there ever.
Yeah.
Probably the last if I write the story that I thought that it inspired.
Yeah, yeah. But you were looking at the scenery today, and this is something that crime writers do a lot. We're not tourists anymore. We're looking for body drops. So we go out in beautiful scenery and we go, oh my God, it is so beautiful here. Oh, that's a good place for a body. So I suspect that you did a lot of, obviously you had a lot of opportunity, sort of mining your bus tours around Europe and that sort of stuff. Although the murders weren't happening, the murders in Tugga's mob were actually happening in New Zealand and here in Australia. So that was probably like what do you call it, a location search, like what they do in the movies. We're going to find the best place to do a body. One off the Great Ocean Road, one off cliffs up in Sydney, and various others around the place. So, what prompted you bringing it all back, in a sense, all back to Victoria and the local area, especially around Steiglitz? Like, you could have chosen any gold town. Why Steiglitz?
virtually, I think all of the locations are where I've been, but here I've grown up, and again, probably thinking, well, write about what you know. The Great Ocean Road I love. In fact, started with great exposition, about the wonders of how they built it, construction, hanging off the cliff, and the editor saying, yeah, that's good, but you're writing a thriller, that all goes out, and it comes down to 2 lines. So it is familiar territory, but, bad things can happen. So it is a backdrop to the tapestry you're working with to tell the wider story of what you're trying to create, the drama and the tension. And Great Ocean Road, a character dies up in Terrigal on the Central Coast, and that came from a trip we had not long before we went off to Europe. So we store these locations. The visualisation comes back when you're at the computer and you think, where can I kill someone? Oh, that's a good one. Oh, that will work. So it's like a bit of a puzzle. You're piecing them around, and as long as it's plausible and it will work, it is. You might think we're a bit twisted, but it is quite fascinating to make it all work.
I've got an image in my mind of, and I reckon I was probably 6 or 7 the first time I thought about it. So I've obviously been wanting to be a crime writer since then. I was raised on Famous Five, and I've yet to use it. So I've got to find a way to use it. And it is something bad. Someone's chasing something. Someone is being chased through a derelict timber yard, like out in the bush. So there are rusted saw benches and things like that. And it's been in my head since. That's a long time to have something in your head and not use it. Maybe I'll use it in the next book.
Well, that's the thing. We're constantly gathering information. So I've actually written the 3rd book in this series. It's still got to go through editing the process and convincing Lindy that it merits the same attention as this. But I've also gone on. I just couldn't stop during COVID. I just kept writing, which is so unlike me. They had to almost tie at the desk to complete the news assembly, and on TV, someone else can do that. I'll just arrange the pictures. Now I can't stop writing, and the ideas come to you all the time. Today, I just went out to the beach and said, "Oh yeah, this is a good side." And you probably need to be wary of the people standing in the corner, the quiet people just listening and observing. They're probably writers, just stockpiling it all.
Yeah, I was actually in the Dorset Gardens hotel a few years ago with a fellow writer, and David Astle, who on Letters and Numbers, he was actually interviewing us because Liz and I were about to work out the nuts and bolts of a murder mystery. This is for a Sisters in Crime event that we were hosting, and we were writing a murder, not a mystery. We were planning the murder to the absolute nth degree, including crime scene photos and all of that sort of stuff. And the concept was that we wrote this thing, and real life people were going to solve it. We had an assistant police commissioner, a forensic pathologist, and something else all lined up there with our clues. And we were going to, but here we were telling David Astle about it, and the people behind us were going, "What's this murder? Who's been murdered?" And they actually thought that we were talking about a real murder that we had planned or plotted or something like that. You can get yourself into terrible trouble.
You can at times, particularly because that's a wonderful thing about being in crime fiction community. I'm based in Auckland, and I've joined Auckland Crime Writers, and there are all these lovely people that come along to our morning teas and gatherings, and they're pretty much like everyone here. And then they start talking about, well, I've got these poisonous ice barbs in the freezer, and I'm just working out if I could get them and kill someone with them before they melted. And if anyone else heard it, apart from our Auckland crime writing group, they probably have the whole police force of Auckland coming to take us away.
Although I had the reverse, we're actually sitting around the table actually plotting a homicide once, and the person on the other side of the table just thought we were discussing the latest novel that we were doing, but we were trying to find a way to kill a husband that really needed to be dealt with. So, Steve, talking about all the research that you did on the Great Ocean Road, stuff like that, the thing we editors like to call the info dump. And the thing that readers out there who will, will suddenly come across, they might be reading a historical novel and think, oh my God, the editors really should have reined this person in. We don't need to know about the complete latrine habits of people in the 1860s on the south side of this street in Ballarat. We really don't. Passing mention of the smell might be all that you need. But it's actually really hard, as you know, when you're writing. You want to include all the fabulous things that you found. So how do you scale back things like that just to leave the one or two sentences that give the flavour?
The editor beating the hell out of you, sort of in the email saying, get rid of that, get rid of it. You've lost the reader, you've lost me.
But have you learned from the process of the first one?
Yes, and I'm still learning, and I think I'll keep learning through every book. I think it's going to be a never-ending process, but at least I'm conscious of it. But because the information out there, if you're researching, is so much easier with Google, that you can learn the weirdest things, and you think, well, this is great. You go off at a tangent. Now, what was my story? Oh, okay, box. It's about greyhounds and live baiting. No, come back to it. And the editing, is so important, but you do have to fight the urge to say, well, I've got all this fantastic information. I love it. Everyone else will love it. And then you understand, well, the editor is you as a reader first time, and you're picking up the book and you're wanting to be following this fantastic plot, but you don't want to hear about, what the greyhounds do in the kennels and whatever it is, the story, the plot, the characters. And it is a process I'm still learning, and, one of these days I might.
Well, it is a lifelong process. My editorial team and I have a thing that we call the editorial process that takes out the weasel words. The weasel words like that and
Just
and very.
Very.
And so it's fine if you use them as you're writing, but if you do a search and replace on a 80,000 word manuscript after you've written merrily along, doing your best to not have info dumps and doing all that sort of stuff. If you then do a search and destroy, you'll invariably have something like 120 verys that are unnecessary, and so many that's it's not worth, and you leave about 3 of them in, one that, one very, one, and it's...
Yeah. In fact, I think that was about 120 the first time through on Tugga's Mob,
yeah.
And felt so embarrassed at it and writing the next time you do think, yeah, I'll stop it. When you get in the flow and you're just going, the plot is driving you forward, and you go back and you look at it 10 times and think, oh, that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. But it's actually much better to do it afterwards, because you're not stopping the flow. Because even though you're trying to write realistic dialogue, dialogue's never realistic. Dialogue's always really clever, or trying to hide a clue, or give you information about something on the side. And so so it's never actually realistic. So, but while you're writing it, you need to write it as if it's the way that you would write it. Rather than just the way you would write it. And so that is necessary while you're writing.
It is, but also after a while, I suppose the characters, you find their voice. Michael Robotham at Rotorua Noir, the fantastic crime festival in New Zealand, the first one. And he'd written so many books, very successful, but he said, you do struggle to find the character's voice. And with Boxed, I really found Joe and Kim's voice, that they are real people to me. They're not my daughters, they're not my daughter's friends. I did pinch some of my daughter's friends' names for the characters. I said, they won't be killed, they won't be hurt in any way, but I'm sort of running out of good names, Kristen and Renee and so forth. But the characters are talking to you, so I suppose the dialogue can become a little bit more fluent as you go along, as you learn. And in fact, in the third book, at that stage, because we had COVID, it was going to be a bit of a lag to get to publication, and I just had to keep writing another book. And I started with other characters because, one, I wasn't sure if Kim and Joe would be impressive or successful, and also whether...
In book
two, in Box. And I started off writing the third one, and it just wasn't flowing. So I went back and put Kim and Joe into that story, and it just took off. You know, they were telling me the story. I was just literally sort of following on behind it. It felt like that.
It actually really worries me how easy it was for you to be sucked in by your imaginary friends. And it usually takes writers a little bit more time to have them actually talking to you.
They were actually in the motorhome. Kath never knew. Tugga and his mob were in the back of the motorhome all the way around Europe. You know.
Yeah, I bet she loved that, not.
She didn't love it in Ireland because I'd be taking the book out and say, right, can you please write this down? You know, I've got this idea. And so she'd be writing it down. And we were listening to a radio interview that day, and they were talking about new authors, and they said, well, what can a new author expect to make from a book? And the guy said, oh, about £1. And Kath said, well, why don't I just throw this out the window now? I said, no, we've got to finish. So, but they're ever present. And your mind, literally, because I'd be driving, I'd be seeing France, Spain, Portugal, all the places we'd loved and wanted to go back to. I'm still enjoying it, but I'm travelling with Tugga, and also recalling the anecdotes from my time as the tour guide and driver. You know, the people coming up to you and saying, do we use Italian lira when we go to Rome? Yeah, you do. And all the sort of inane and innocuous comments that came along. But in Tugga, there are a lot of anecdotes from time on the road that are filtered through there, embellished to a certain degree that you know, people cannot identify themselves. And the inspiration for Tugga, well, that person's now at the bottom of Hong Kong Harbour, so I don't think we have any defamation issues.
That's quite a weird notion. It's actually the first time it's occurred to me driving around Europe in Quasimodo, the motorhome, seeing Europe again with your wife, who you'd met on one of those top deck tours in the first place, but spending all your headspace, even while you're driving around, back in the 80s. Doing the same thing, but doing it without the internet, doing it with... You have to constantly think, well, you know, back then, the only way to communicate with home was to find a phone box and get your parents to accept a reverse charge call just so they know that you're still alive.
Post restant and that sort of stuff. And this time around, you could have just sort of, you know, got on your iPad and made a FaceTime call to me back in Australia, and I could have said, take that full stop out. It's quite weird. That must have been quite a split personality to be doing that. The whole thing was so weird, that one, we'd escaped. You know, I was going to Europe to escape work, and yet here I was happily engaged in writing, which I never liked in the first place. And it was just such a great feeling. And I suppose the confidence sort of was growing slowly, that, well, as the story was building, and then, oh, I can introduce another character. I need another cameraman at work at Channel, the station in Melbourne. So just, okay, who can it be? What features can I take from people we know? You know, amalgamation of several people. So my headspace was, everywhere, but I was still enjoying Europe. I was still, you know, I think Kath, you know, knew I was there. We did talk. She would go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. She needs 10 hours sleep. She's that sort of person. So I could have late evening to write or go to the bar or talk to people, whatever. So, but she would go to bed before the Spanish kids even had their dinner. They'd be running around outside waiting for Mama to call them for dinner, and Kath's asleep. But that just added to the fun of that trip. It was the greatest adventure of our lives. And
then the next one you wrote in a garret in Auckland.
Well, part of it was written in Quasimodo in New Zealand, and also under a house. We came back and we didn't have a house, and the family sort of got sick of us moving around, and they said, well, it's time to go to your brother's over there, go to your sister over there. We ended up under a brother-in-law's house, and then finally got a house in a suburb called Glendowie, and I don't want to ever leave there. I've got an attic which looks over the Tamaki River, marina, the ferries come and go all day, beside us is a park. We've got several parks where you can walk for miles and miles. I've got this room, I've got the TV, I've got my desk. That's heaven. There's even a bed in the corner if I do need to sleep. I haven't got food up there. That's about the only thing I'm missing.
We get a dumb waiter organised for you. I suspect that one of the reasons why you discovered that you liked writing after all was because it's fiction. Like I write a bit of true crime, mostly under sufferance. It was an accident. I wrote the first story and then I did a book and then I was asked to, edit an anthology and get other people to write. And the last one I did was only a couple of years ago with my sister. And I from a journalist's point of view, I enjoy writing those stories, but they're true and there's rarely good justice comes out of them. The person who commits the murder doesn't get nearly enough time in jail, or they never get solved. Whereas when you're writing fiction, not only are you creating the characters who will right the wrongs, first of all, you're creating the bad guys, but there can't be a good guy if there's no bad guys. That's one of the really cool things about crime fiction. Otherwise you've just got a spotlight news crew going out doing, nice things. And we might hate it that we watch news every night and it's about this murder and that, accident or that bit of terror. But without those, news, it would be wonderful. But news would just be, cute cats and politicians boring us.
Yeah.
Witless. So the whole having a news team, your fictitious news team that can go and stumble on a crime and then help actually solve it is...
That sense of justice, that I suppose has always been important in all the stories I'm doing, that you can create that. And that's something you felt denied as journalists over the years. You've covered some horrendous crimes and stories and look what's happening in Ukraine now. You think you want to fix it, you want a happy ending. You can do that with fiction and it's very satisfying, incredibly satisfying, and you just have to work out, well, I thought I was a plotter. I still am a plotter. I'd like to start, these are my characters now, this is what's going to happen, and I know who the perpetrator is going to be at the end. But how things get to that point can change. I'm not hard and fast about that, but I know each time I want a sense of justice, that people think the rights of the world have been set back in place, and I think that's quite important in my stories.
I think that's why most readers who love crime fiction, that's why they love it too. The order out of chaos, the justice out of injustice, and sometimes the police achieve that. If it's a police procedural, sometimes they get it done. Sometimes it's the amateur sleuths. In your case, they're not amateur sleuths. It's their job to cover the news. So there's that. Private eyes, do it their own way. A vigilante would have a whole different take on what justice means. There's a whole other range of very satisfying fiction. Another good thing about writing crime fiction, of course, is that you can bump people off. The imaginary, the not so imaginary people, like your bank manager who won't give you the loan,
Television accountants.
Yes, all those
people
sorts of things.
hold the budget.
so you can knock anyone off. You can think up really intriguing ways. Sometimes I think it's the worst thing you can possibly be is to be a crime writer, because there are real murders out there, and I think there are real murders. And in here we're talking about how to bump someone off with a arrow made of ice, or how to dispose of a body the most efficient way possible, how to incriminate someone else. It's really diabolical. And if we, I don't know if someone looked in our minds whether they'd go, they really need to be committed somewhere, or we write it so we don't do it. Who knows? Val McDermid. Who knows Val McDermid, the writer Val McDermid? Scottish writer responsible for innumerable books, and she always used to complain on panels when she would be asked a question about the sex in her book. She says, "Why?" She's a fabulous Scottish accent, which I can't do. She says, "I don't know why people always assume that I've had the sex in my books. They never assume I've done any of the murders. What's with that?" So give us a bit of a background on. We've been talking a lot about Tugga's Mob, but what about Boxed? We had discovered a thing on the weekend about Boxed and the cover. Well, when it comes question time, I'll ask you something about the cover. But we suspect that the cover is not serving the book very well. So it'll be interesting to see if you feel the same thing in a moment. So, Boxed. What is Boxed about? What is it not about?
No greyhounds were harmed in the creation of the story, so greyhounds are purely the background for the story. So, again, I wanted something that people had not necessarily dealt with before, and I think there's only been half a dozen crime books involving greyhounds, thanks to research from our PR woman, Carmel. I didn't realise that at the time, but I just wanted something a bit different. So I had my news crew that I was familiar with. I worked as a producer in New Zealand, making a greyhound program for a couple of years. So I love greyhounds. I don't own one, but I do like them. It was purely the background. So the story is about essentially three women who find themselves in trouble, and their fates are lined by a killer wanting retribution. So two of them are the news crew. Kim gets reports of live baiting happening in the greyhound industry, and I think you remember the terrible images of 2015, the ABC expose of what was going on in the industry, and it almost shut down. They cleaned their act up. They probably still need to do more things. But Kim, young, eager, ambitious reporter, says, we'll go out to the trainer's farm, we'll put up the cameras, we'll catch him in the act. So they go out there, sneak onto the property, think, oh, okay, this is a bit suspicious, but they find something very different in the starting boxes, not what they are expecting.
And not a dog. Something on one level much worse, but if it had been a dog, it would have been way worse if it was a dog.
That's the thing. What they do find...
Which is a very weird thing about crime fiction as well. You never kill the dog. And we are over, as editors and publishers, we are over an author who proves a psychopath is really psychopathic by actually, sneaking into the home, and they're going to kill the entire family, but to prove that they're really irredeemable, they also kill the cat. So we're over that as a thing now. So there are no dogs harmed in the making of this book.
Yeah, so they find something, and then it all starts unravelling from that point. So again, it's a bit of an ensemble cast of characters, which I had fun creating. Kim and Joe are to the fore in this one. Joe inadvertently finds herself sort of brought into it by a animal activist who's hell-bent on revenge. And Kim's eagerness, but at the same time there's a woman who's been held captive. She's a mysterious figure that permeates throughout the book. Every so often she's scratching the days of her captivity into the walls of a cellar, but she's determined she's going to survive, she's going to escape, and somehow all their fates come together in a fairly explosive and slippery conclusion.
Somehow, like you didn't work at it.
It was always going to happen. It just took a couple hundred pages to get there.
We're going to have some questions in a moment, so if you want to put your little grey cells to work in a few moments, you can ask Steve any questions you like about writing or his books, or about not hurting animals. One question I'll ask you, Steve, another question I'll ask you, Steve, is how would you get away with murder? How would you get away with murder? Like you're writing a crime novels which people get murdered, and your sleuths, your camera crew, find it out. What have you learned in all the writing of your things that if you murdered someone, it doesn't matter, bank manager, even an accident, how would you get away with it?
How do you know I haven't?
Right, so...
We have as I said, Auckland Crime Writers Group, and we have a policeman who loves writing crime and World War II things. He says it's his stress release, just killing people, blowing stuff up, absolutely loves it. And he gives us seminars every so often to give us the background. And he says, look, most criminals are pretty stupid. They're pretty easy to find. You know, murders, in a lot of cases, are crimes of passion. They happen, and it doesn't take police long to follow through. We said, okay, the modern criminals a little bit sneakier. They'll try to disguise their cell phone use and think, oh, okay, if I go outside, they can't triangulate me. No, you're still pretty dumb. Or else they'll send text messages saying, did you pick up the brick? Can you bring the brick to my place? We'll meet you down at Cunningham Pier. Dumb things like that. And he said, then there are the really, really clever ones. They're much harder to catch. They will go out into the bush. Their guards will make sure no one goes anywhere near them. Then they'll just walk away. No listening devices, no cameras, no drones in the area. They'll stand under a tree and they'll organise their deal or whatever. Someone to be killed, drugs to be done. He said, fortunately, there aren't enough of those smart crims around. As a writer, I'm trying to find plausible plots that will entertain people, will have enough red herrings to keep you going and guessing to the end and think, oh yes, I caught you out in Mission, the Tugga's mob, didn't I? So I want to keep doing that each time. But at the same time, I want to have a logical discovery of the criminal. So on that basis, I would probably get caught myself.
You mentioned before that you think you're a plotter, not a pantser. Who knows what a plotter and a pantser is? Nope. So a plotter is someone who will sit down and plot the entire or most of the novel. They know what's going to happen, they know who's going to die, they know who's going to do it. And a pantser is someone who just sits down and writes, okay, there's a body, and they just go for it. And they quite often have I'm a mix of both. They quite often have no idea what's going to happen or who the actual murderer is. I don't know if any of you have read any of Solari Gentle's books. Apart from the history that she starts with, that she's going to incorporate into her book that time, she has no idea until her character does who has committed the murder. And she sometimes has to go back and tweak things, but it works for her all the way through. So you must do a bit of pantsing, surely.
I do. As I realise now, it's probably, I do know who's going to do it and what's going to happen and how it's going to finish. But in between, with the first book, because I was back in Europe, I'm in Switzerland, Trummelbach Falls, something can happen here. The Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, yes, Tugga does something terrible here to Judy. So I was adding things in and it was still working well in the plot. And I did go off at little tangents again, trying to throw the red herrings and lead the reader astray. But I am fixed as far as where...
Plot points.
Yeah, plot points. But the whole narrative can be very fluid. So.
Well, the tone of the two books is quite different because there's actually three different storylines in Tugga's Mob. There's Judy's original story from the diary, and then there's somebody running around doing things, but you don't know who it is, and then there's the camera crew. And it's pretty much the same in Box, which is really difficult to follow. No, that's not what I meant to say. It's not difficult to follow. It's difficult to write in order to pull them together so that they work really well, especially with a big cast of characters. And you've done it in such a way as that it doesn't feel like a big cast of characters as well.
I think it's probably also certainly the television crew. They're familiar in our lives. We know what the presenters on TV. We know the camera crews. A lot of us have seen them around. Probably many people have been involved in it. So they're ever-present characters. the greyhound racing industry, we know they're there, so it's the familiar, but then getting that standout, the crime, the personality, the hook to think, oh yeah, this is dangerous, something's going to happen here, and that's sort of coming through Kim and Joe, who keep getting themselves into trouble.
Steve and I were in Rotorua for Rotorua Noir. It's actually hard to say that. He'd already handed boxed in, and he was thinking about what the next one might be, and he had his motorhome with him, and we were travelling around in a motorhome as well at the time. And Steve's had a bed that goes up and down, and we just had crappy things in the back of ours.
At the press of a button.
Press the button and think it. And so we're sitting there having lunch one day in his thing, and he's demonstrating the thing. And I said, well, you could put a body up there. So we started working out all the places that you could put a body in a camper van. There's a lot of spaces. And I suspect that's exactly what you've done with book number 3.
Yes.
Yes.
So, forecasting ahead. So, and it's also based on a bit of fact as well. We took Quasimodo around New Zealand, and there was 2 cyclones chasing us south, and we didn't quite outrun the second one. We broke down on the coast on the South Island near Kaikoura, and from here to the back of the wall away from the sea with a cyclone coming in, and woke up the next morning with half the hillside that side of the motorhome, half the hillside on that side of the motorhome, and we're stuck there for 12 days. And it turned out to be an interesting experience. Luckily, just nearby, they were still rebuilding after the earthquakes, the Kaikoura earthquakes. So there was a roadworks base. They had free Wi-Fi, they had toilets, they had water, they were good company, and they sort of looked after us. We eventually it took 12 days to get Quasimodo down to Christchurch, and thought that was an adventure. Took lots of photos, and then in Rotorua, the idea struck. Oh, yes. And Lindy suggested, well, what if they're bank robbers trying to flee from Kaikoura, and this all happens? And I said, I don't think there's a bank in Kaikoura anymore, and any cash they had wouldn't fit, the pages of this. So I just set the mind at work, and there was so much inspiration came out of that writing festival, and I thought, yeah, that's great, that's exciting. And I will say that there is a body, but it didn't quite work in the bed.
Oh, bugger.
But the garage is one of the biggest garages on motorhomes you've ever seen, and yeah.
And the most amazing thing about this book when it comes in will be the fact that who knew there were cyclones in New Zealand?
Very regular with climate change. In fact, they had 2 within 2 weeks. And Cyclone Gita was the one that struck us. In fact, they had leftover one this summer. Caused a bit of water.
Yeah. Okay, we'll open to questions. If anyone's got any questions about Steve's book or his writing. Yes, in the middle there. Is a microphone coming?
Thank you. Have you got a crime writer that you admire and that you've been influenced by with regard to your writing style or the behavior of your characters? And a second question is, are you planning to write in the future non-crime fiction books as well?
To the last question, yes. I've written a historic novel which is going through editing now, based in 1962 in East Germany, but that's for down the track. Writing-wise, Michael Rowbotham, Alan Carter, his Marlborough Man series, Doom Creek. Initially, I suppose, I was an action thriller reader through the 80s and 90s. Le Carre, Dayton, when the spy novel was king. When the Berlin Wall came down, I thought, oh goodness, where do we go here? Read Robert Ludlum because people are getting shot and blown up and adventure. It was always escapism to me because through my education, I had to read the Dickens, I had to read all the great authors over the years. And yeah, it's very worthy, but it was sending me to sleep. So my reading since college has been thrillers, and I would probably read international thrillers because they were there on the bookshop or in the library shelf when I went there, and didn't think much about Australian or New Zealand until I started writing myself. And giving the book to Lindy, she said, well, you've got some great writers over there, get to know them. Paul Cleave, Vanda Simon, Paddy Richardson, Nikki Crutchley, in Australia, Peter Temple, Peter Corris. I think I'd read a Peter Corris book many years ago and thought, yeah, that's okay, but there was a cringe factor with local authors to a certain extent. Not that I was conscious of it, but you thought, well, you had to be a Michael Connolly or an Ian Rankin. Love theirs. Stuart McBride, Val McDermott. They're there on the shelf, new book, you would pull them out rather than thinking, well, what else is there? And that's why events like this is so important for local writers, that it's introducing me and other people like me that think, well, yeah, we'll give it a try, we'll have a look, we'll have a read and think that may be good. And I think from doing this, it's given me the confidence to say that a good story with good characters, good plot, can be set anywhere. Can be in Australia. Michael Rowbotham was told, don't set your stories in Australia, you'll never sell. And he sort of made a rod for his own back that his character was always England, and he has great international success. But there are so many other local people who are, setting in Australia. Vicky Petratus, true crime writer, just won a prize with another publishing company for her first crime fiction story. Sulari Gentle, her Roland Sinclair series are just fabulous. I've learned all these authors in the last couple of years since I started writing, and one, it's hard enough to fit in time to write, and two, to read all these great writers and stories. You tend to read one and then think, okay, time to move on, next author, whereas we often binge on our favourite authors, but there just aren't enough years left to read the great crime writers in Australia.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are people in America currently rereading the Franny Fisher mystery series for the third time. It's got them through COVID. I know this because I helped Kerry Greenwood with her email, fan mails and stuff. And there's people saying, oh, I'm just going through them for the third time in 2 years. I find that extraordinary. It's such a fabulous escape. Any other questions?
Talking in
Like this, like an ice cream.
No, it's all right, I can do this. Mine is a rather nebulous sort of question, and it comes round to the reading experience, and you gave us a list of people you had interacted with, if we put it that way. But I have almost given up reading crime because I read for pleasure, and some of these books have left an indelible imprint of nastiness and violence. I would like to know your attitude towards these sorts of things, and how people can get enjoyment from some incredibly unpleasant things.
Yes, certainly we write about terrible things at times, but I think when we're approaching the book, we're looking at mystery. We're wanting to entertain people, and well, I don't want to go overboard. I don't want to, horrify or scare people. Crime is ever present in our lives, but it's also our daily lives are so full of mystery from the time we wake up to what am I going to wear today? What's the weather going to be like today? We always want to know what is happening. We're forever questioning everything about life. And I suppose that's my approach with the story, that it's a whodunit. I don't think my crime description is excessive. People do die, but it's not meant to horrify, it's not meant to shock. And people have that choice. They can look at the book, they can look at the blurb, they can start the book and think, well, that's not for me. That is their choice. If they can probably tell before they get too far into the book it won't appeal. But to other people, I don't think it's an awful pleasure in doing it. I think they're captivated by the mystery and wanting to know, well, what has happened, and also that sense of justice we usually bring to most of our stories, that the evildoer will be punished in some way.
Well, I think the sense of mystery is there and what keeps you reading, but some people have taken it to such a degree that it absolutely blindsides you. And
I totally agree with you. I wouldn't, as a publisher, I wouldn't publish anything like that. I'm also, as I mentioned before briefly, the Vice President of Sisters in Crime Australia. We run a short story competition. We've been doing it for 27 years, and every year there's something in the water. Like, you know, one year it'll be little old ladies knocking off their neighbours, and the next year it'll be women knocking off their husbands, and the next year it'll be insurance frauds. It's very strange. There's just like a little confluence of similar things. But none of the judges in the whole history of 27 years have ever taken to anything that has gratuitous violence in it. We just go, nah, that is not what we're looking for. We're looking for crime and mystery stories with a female hero in it. That's one of the things that they have to have. But as a judging group, unless the story, if it's not gratuitous and there's violence in it, that's fine. But if the moment it becomes done for glory or gore or whatever, we just set it aside, and anything that happens to animals is we just tell everyone every year, don't give us stories where bad things happen to animals because we don't like them, we won't read them, which is kind of not fair, but it's when you're doing it year after year, you don't want it. So I think that, and as a publisher, I wouldn't publish books. And I publish a fair amount of crime fiction. I wouldn't publish books with anything gratuitous in it. I also happen to publish Vicky Petraeus's Frankston Murders book. And that's real stuff. That's gory, that's it, that's everything. Everything is in that book because that is what it's about. It's real. Luckily, he was also caught, so there is an ending to that story as well. But if someone brought that story to me in fiction, I wouldn't publish it because it's hideous. So there's that side of it.
You held a forum here a couple of years ago with Vicky and Robin Bowles called Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, and I came along and listened to it, and it really made my eyes pop that worse things happen in real life than what we portray in fiction.
Yeah. Way worse. So, what we do in fiction is we try to give you good characters, good entertainment, and you'll come to notice too, if you come across an author who is tripping along merrily, giving you fantastic descriptions of the bush, and you're a bit worried that because it's set in the drought that there might be some dead cows. That's my mother-in-law's favourite hate. And there's a gentle mystery happening, and then all of a sudden it gets gory and bloody. Okay, you stop then. You don't ever read that author again. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't read shouldn't give the next author a go who's also set it in an outback town, because it might just be a good, rollicking, funny mystery. You never can tell. The best way to is take the advice of your librarian or your friends. Don't read this one, it's gory. Don't read this one, he doesn't care about children or animals. Or read all of these, because yes, there's murders, but they're off the page. They're more like a Miss Marple, they're more like an Agatha Christie, where the violence is over there and the mystery is central and the characters are central.
Out of most of the famous writers, none of them fit into that gratuitous category. They would never be successful. And as a reader, you make the decision.
Any other questions? At the front?
I'm just interested in the Steiglitz aspect of it. What brought you to use Steiglitz as a reference?
From being a local, growing up and having picnics and exploring the old mine tailings up there as a kid countless times, I wanted a setting with a trainer who was away from the city. So he's a dog trainer, but he's also a farmer. I knew Steiglitz well. You also have to be reasonably anonymous. You don't know exactly where in Steiglitz it is. So it can't be Joe down the road or that person. and that suited it well. And I've always loved the area. It's always been a fascinating place.
Childhood home. Oh, so that's why I'm totally absorbed.
Thank you. We all find locations like that when we sort of file them away. When can that come out? Oh, Steiglitz will work there. Tugga's mob will. I use Te Awamutu, and people think, well, where the hell is that? It's, again, fairly anonymous area. We've got countless places where we want things to happen, and they'll just come out of the file when we need them.
Yes, you need a Melbourne city street, so you pick your suburb. Does it need to have cafes? Does it need to have pizza restaurants? Does it need to have just parks? I got these people accost me one night they'd gone looking for a park that I'd written in one of my books to take their dog for a walk, and I'd made it up. And I said, I'm really sorry, it's not real. There was another question in the middle.
I was just curious, you've obviously found your writer's mojo at a later stage. When you were at school and you had the opportunity to write fiction, did you enjoy writing fiction then? Was it something?
I did try once in about grade 3. A teacher gave us a paragraph about a cave. I was always fascinated with caves and smugglers and the famous five go to Smugglers Cove, or top, sorry, I never remember. But I remember the famous five. When I went to Cornwall, I had to go the coast first off. That grade 3 exercise lasted about 5 paragraphs before my brother said, come outside and play cricket. I said, okay, and I never went back to it. I'd always liked reading, always enjoyed reading, but I mean, I couldn't do it. I thought, well, I didn't have the inspiration to do it beyond what school required. I went to St Bernard's, St Augustine's, then St Mary's. We didn't have a library up at St Mary's, so we used to do our projects downstairs here in the old library, and that's, I suppose, where one of my other passions started, and that was travel. So doing projects on Japan, Afghanistan, Asia, Europe and that. Travel took more of a fascination rather than the writing. And I thought, well, I'd love to travel one day, never believing it would happen. And eventually it did, and I just didn't stop with it. And with the writing, my life, when we set off in 2017, I convinced my wife by saying, well, look, we don't know what's going to happen in 2020 when I was due to retire. I said, I think, why don't we go now? So we just got so lucky with that. And I am surprised at the pleasure I've found in the writing and the experience. Today I'm staying with friends and I'm editing another book. And 2 hours went past without me sort of knowing it, sort of grumbling at the editor for putting all this red type in, but then thinking, yeah, they're reading it for the first time, they're giving me a direction of what's not working for them, and going back and just restructuring and just rejigging a few lines and then having the satisfaction at the end of that saying, that reads better, they're doing their job, I'm doing my job. That is enormously satisfying.
Any no more questions? If there aren't any more questions, we'll wrap up. Thank you very much for coming along to listen to Steve today. Thank you, Steve, for entertaining everyone. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learnt a thing or two about what goes on in the minds of people like Steve. There are books for sale up the back. You can get either or both of Steve's books. They're on a special price. They're they're only $25. They're normally $32 in the shops, so a bargain and even better if you buy 2 of them. And I just happen to have brought my latest one along too, but that's by the by. It's an gentle anthology of mystery stories in which animals help other animals solve crimes or help their owners solve crimes. So nothing bad happens to the animals, and the animals are all the crime solvers. So there's that as well.
And it's sold out at Clune's
Yeah, it's
festival.
sold out at Clunes Booktown, so... Oh, yes, okay, just a quick thing about the cover. When you get up, if you do go up there and have a look at it, we're just wondering, if you was to see this cover, you probably can't see it really well at the moment. If you were to see this cover, what do you think the book is about? Greyhounds. Do you think it's do you recognise it as a crime novel? Or you think it's about greyhounds? About racing, okay. But if you knew it was a crime novel, obviously you might think there was something bad was going to happen to the greyhounds, wouldn't you? Right, okay, we've got to change the cover, Steve. Okay, and on that note, Steve will happily sign anything that you happen to buy. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. And thank you to Geelong Library as well for having us.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, and Geelong Library. Much appreciated.